Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar. My name is Krina Bildeia. I am the Sales Director here at mobileLIVE, and it is my pleasure to be the moderator for today's session. Now we will start with my colleague Raga, our Test Automation Manager, and he will present to you about how to overcome end-to-end complexities using HyperAutomation. And then we'll continue with a panel discussion with our guests, the CEO and founder of mobileLIVE, Jahan Ali, and the CEO of UXPLORE, Noel Kirthiraj. And of course, we'll try to allocate some time at the end to take some of your questions. But just to be mindful, for those to happen, please use the chat window that you have on the screen, just to make sure that everybody can attend, can listen, and you can participate in a kind of a quiet mode. And now, because I'm aware about time, I will hand over things to my colleague Raga to kick off. Raga, over to you now.
Thanks, Krina, for the introduction. And thanks, everyone, for attending the webinar today. Today's topic is hyperautomation, overcoming complexity in end-to-end testing. Let's go through the agenda. What is hyperautomation? RPA-inspired automated end-to-end testing. Understanding the changing landscape, the challenges, implementing hyperautomation, and some real demos. So now, what is hyperautomation? According to us, hyperautomation today involves a combination of tools, technologies, such as RPA, chatbots, and AI to build an efficient solution, end-to-end solution. Based on our experience, we realize that no single tool can address today's complexity. So let's go and take a look at the evolution of hyperautomation. So automation started with simple automation where you would automate basic tasks and rules in RPA. Now, going to the next level is the process automation workflow in IBPMS. So what that means is that you can put a bunch of tasks in a process and then automate that. You would also use additional tools such as chatbots and smart speakers and virtual assistants. Now, if you scale that further to an enterprise level as a business operation, that would come into hyperautomation, where you use all the tools and technology that you use in simple tasks in process automation. You add AI and machine learning to it, that will become hyperautomation. Basically, what you're doing is you're orchestrating all the technology that you need to combine into a single feasible solution. Now, since testing is also a process, we apply RPA concept to complex end-to-end testing. That is why we said RPA inspired. That means that we are using the concept of RPA into end-to-end test automation. Now, let's look at the understanding, changing the landscape. Now, if you look at that, you all know that solutions are getting complex. Now, what we have traditionally is an in-app solution. What does that mean, in-app solution? That means that you have either like a standalone mobile app, or you're testing something on the tablet or web or some legacy test. Now, these usually have a single interface. Now, what makes things complicated? It's the transformation from in-app to inter-app solution. So what that means is that each app is talking to each other. They are not standalone anymore. So this would add the complexity. Now, more and more apps are now interconnected. Now, in addition to that, experiences are also getting more versatile. What does that mean? Now, instead of having a single interface or single input, we have now many different types, like voice, gesture, motion. We also have different outputs. Now, there's also different displays now, not only phones anymore, Google Lens, Google Glass, so many other things. And the computing has also changed now, cloud computing, distributed computing. So all of these makes into a versatile testing requirement. Now, without hyperautomation, you will not be able to do that. Now, what are the challenges from the changing landscape? First, it's the increased complexity. Applications are more and more complex and interconnected. More variants and inputs and outputs. So what does that mean? That means that you need to test more requirements and more parameters and more platforms. And the last one is increase in IoT. So there are more and more devices. So what does that mean, more and more devices? That means that you need to test more and more. For example, there are about 2-3 billion IoT devices. Imagine testing all of that end to end. So that adds to the complexity. Now, because of the complexity, there's more pressure to reduce time to market, reduce cost, achieve higher quality, more frequent releases, shorter cycle times, seamless integration with DevOps. Now, all that is possible if you want to do that only with end-to-end automation. So end-to-end automation is no longer an option. It is mandatory for a good user experience. Now, how do we overcome these challenges? Well, what we do is we specialize in end-to-end full stack testing across the ecosystem. Now, what does that mean, end-to-end full stack? So what that means is we are testing horizontally and vertically. So if you look at the diagram here, that means, for example, for application, we can test native, hybrid, web, or any desktop or mainframe application. Domains, it could be different type of domains, billing, fulfillment, CRM, IVR, many. And then also architectures, networks. So for architecture, for our end-to-end testing, it's really transparent. We really don't care what's underneath, because all we care is the interface and how we can interface, get talk to the input and get the output. And the networks, 5G platforms, we don't care what platforms as long as interfaces. Now, you might think, okay, why is automation so hyped now? Because people now realize the traditional way of testing doesn't cut it anymore. Fortunately, we've been doing hyperautomation so many years, so it's nothing new for us. Now, if you look at hyperautomation is useful only if you have multiple interface. So like I mentioned before, we either test vertically or horizontally or both together. So a multiple interface needs hyperautomation. But now if you are talking like a legacy system, single interface, you can do regular automation, or like you call it a simple automation, whether it's RPA or it's RTA. You don't need hyperautomation for that. But for complexity, multiple inputs and output, you definitely need hyperautomation. Now, our approach is that automate anything that has an interface. So in order for automation to work, whether RPA or any type of automation, you need to have an access to an interface. So what does that mean? What could be an interface, for example, that we typically use? Most of them are either a display. So a display, for example, you can remote or you can VNC. So you have access to the display. We can use AI to test algorithms, like using OCR, we can compare screen capture. Or you have, for example, TCP interface where you can send use protocols, SOAP or REST or anything that you name it. Or there are other ones that you can, but you need to have an access to that. So when we have access, we can orchestrate that. Now, that's how do we do hyperautomation? Now, you know how we talked about different interfaces that we can automate anything that we have access to. So that's how we build hyperautomation. So what we have is an orchestrator that will orchestrate actions or tasks on each of the interface in a sequential manner, collect the result from each of the execution on each interface, and create a consolidated report. So we don't really care what tools. As long as we have an interface and access using the tool, we can orchestrate any tool. Now, what are the benefits of doing hyperautomation? Well, it ensures the correctness of the application because we are testing vertically and also horizontally. Now, I feel other benefits is that it reduces cost and the confidence in the application. Now, let's look at some real use cases that we implemented. So we have use cases from one of the major banks, two from the major telcos, and also one big car automakers. So we have all variety of real hyperautomation use cases. So this one is one of a major bank where we have to do automation for investment transactions. So the client needed end-to-end automation solution for the investment testing. What were their challenges? So they had lots of manual effort, longer testing cycle, multi-platform. So this test case, for example, this is an example of how do you create a check-in account. So you would do some transactions on a desktop application, then you would e-sign when the transaction is finished on an iPad, then you would download the forms from your browser, and then you would compare whether the form is correct or not. So this was fully automated using our tool UXPLORE, where we orchestrated end-to-end automation. There were 6 different platforms and applications. So the end result was that we reduced a lot of defects going into production and also reduced a lot of resource and time. Now, another example is also this is for another telco, major telco operator. So basically, it's an end-to-end order processing allocation, devices assigning and phone numbers, enrolling in price plans. So what were the challenges? So their challenges was a complex system across 7 different systems, unpredictable new order arrival times, and there were a lot of human error. The process manually across these 29 flows and micro skills. So what we did is we automated end to end without any human interaction from flow 3 to all the way to 29. So this increased the capacity, increased the accuracy. Now this is for telco operator as well. Basically what we did is functional testing and performance testing for the setup boxes, including Roku devices. So here what we did is we again orchestrated, like we mentioned, that's the whole point of hyper-automation. So we had 7 different interfaces, including inputs and outputs. So what we did here is we send commands, TCP commands, to go and add a channel. Then this will be triggered by our Python client. Then what we will do is we will capture the output on the screen to make sure it is doing what it's supposed to. This is done by the HDMI capture card. And then we would compare whether the channel was added properly. On top of that, what we do is we do behind the scenes, we'll do latency tracking on the fly. So we can find out how long it took to change the channel or to add the channel. Another example would be IoT. This one was for a major car manufacturer. So they had infotainment system, but now how do you test the infotainment system? Because it's not typical mobile testing, so you need to have access. So what we did is we used another tool called Eggplant to make that happen. We controlled the changing the temperature by a client simulation client using Python. We would send commands to increase the temperature. Then we would check on the screen on the infotainment whether actually, let's say if we increase from 20 to 23 degrees, whether it's actually presented in the screen. On top of that, what we made OBD calls. It's socket calls to check whether the temperature was actually changed on that interface as well. So we're doing 2 validation, one on the infotainment and one on the OBD interface. So now let's go into some of the demos. So here I will the demos will illustrate the following. First, seamless orchestration of various technologies and tools across platforms in a seamless manner. And the other one is the complexity that we talked about, due to the number of interfaces and inputs and outputs resulting in various experiences. So now let's go and look at the demo. So first I'll be doing the 2-way authentication. In here. So now this may look like an easy use case, but it's not. The reason being is that it has 3 platforms. So you're going from browser to mobile. So what we're going to do is we're going to log into Gmail. You know, sometimes when you log into Gmail, you have do 2-factor authentication where it asks for the code. Now the code will be sent to the mobile phone, but the tricky part that the code will be dynamic every time. So you cannot use typical OCR. So that is where the tricky part is, and that's where the challenge comes in. So we will show you how we solve that problem. So on the left screen, you would see the mobile browser. We're opening Gmail. So I'm opening with my test account. Now it's going to ask for the password. Now the code, that's a text message. We're going to grab the code automatically. What we did is we wrote a small Android app that will get the latest SMS and grab the code. We will download the code and display it on the notepad. See here on this side. Then we'll copy and paste it into the browser. There we go. If we don't do this with the app, that means that you will not get reliable results. So that we made sure that the results on the test runs every time without any error. Now let's go into the second demo. Now this is the Roku demo that I was talking about earlier. Let's release the volume again. All right. So here we are using our tool again. UXPLORE, the end-to-end cloud-based solution. How we made HyperAutomation look simple. So let's look at the test setup. So on the right side, you have the two screens for the two Roku devices. One Roku Express and the other one is regular Roku. These are the HDMI capture card connected to each Roku device. Now this is the Linux thin client so that it works with our UXPLORE tool. Now we're going to execute the test cases. It's going to run on the first Roku. Click, and then we run. Simple as it. Now we're going to run the second one soon. Now running on the second one. All right, as you can see, the first one is already running on the left. So it's going to add the dock TV channel. Now the second one is going to run soon now. Okay, now the second one also started. So while it's running, we will do the latency measurements on the fly. We will record it on the fly in the backend. Now both have now finished. Now we're going to go and look at the dashboard. So now we're going to go into a tool, open the dashboard. So here we are comparing the latency measurement, the performance numbers, Roku 3 versus Roku Express. So here's a graph that you can go on. And we also now comparing side by side how long it took for a Bean channel versus the dock TV channel. So then again, the whole thing is orchestrated on the fly without any human intervention. So we had multiple interfaces. So now, based on the conclusion, what we can conclude is that hyperautomation is the right recipe for addressing today's complexity and versatile experiences. Now, it will give us end-to-end automation, increased quality and confidence of solution, sales across organization, and perform multi-variance testing. So these are the advantages of having hyperautomation. Krina, now I pass on to you.
Thank you, Raga. Interesting details. And I hope our audience will find useful to see and to visualize actually how AI and tools like UXPLORE can help really simplify complex processes. Right. Now we will continue to the second part of our session, which will be to have the panel discussion. But before I do that, I'd just like to remind everyone that we'll try to have some time at the end to actually get your questions. And for that, please, I encourage you to use the chat window to share your questions. Either you send them directly to me or directly to everyone in this session. And we'll try to cover as many as possible. All right. Now, I will introduce you to our panel today. First, a serial entrepreneur and early adopter and advocate of automation, he realized that all major automation products were being produced in the US and Europe. To change that, he aligned with the government of Canada to launch his own robotic software factory. I'm introducing the founder and CEO of mobileLIVE, Jahan Ali.
Hey guys.
Our next panelist is someone who seems until every mundane, monotonous, and rule-based task is automated. A true visionary and an enabler of the hyperautomation future, I am pleased to introduce the CEO of UXPLORE, Noel Kirthiraj.
Hi guys.
Okay, and now we have a lot to cover, so I'm just going to dive in with the first question, and I'd like to start with you, Jahan. What does hyperautomation mean to you, please?
So hyperautomation, as Raga said, in my opinion, is basically achieving scalable end-to-end automation across all the functions, processes, channels, and platforms. So what is the goal? The goal is to achieve automation across whole user journey, Again, if you look at it right now, mobile is the center of universe or center of attention. But going forward, and actually it has already happened, that user is the new center of attention. All other systems are around the user. So that is why automating end-to-end user journey, I believe, is the most critical part of automation. Here I want to highlight a difference between RPA and hyperautomation, because Raga mentioned a few times RPA. RPA is robotic process automation, which is a task-based automation, where repetitive rule-based tasks you automate. While hyperautomation is beyond RPA. In hyperautomation, what we do, we add more technologies and we orchestrate them in a coordinated manner. Those technologies could be process mining, process discovery. We can use no-code, low-code platforms. We can use artificial intelligence. When I talk about artificial intelligence, it could be natural language processing, it could be machine learning, computer vision, OCR, and chatbots, etc. So let's take a step back and go back to the testing world. In the context of testing, we know as the systems are becoming so complex and the actual, I would say, the success of any organization is the success is the user experience of the end consumer. And now people think that, oh, application is being tested, well and good, we have tested the application. No, this application, the actual quality of the application may be derivative of all different layers behind it. That could mean the architecture of the application, it could be different networks, it could be 4G, 3G, it could be Wi-Fi, 5G is coming, then different platforms, Android, iOS, and different devices, mobile, tablet, kiosk. So if you look at all these different type of variations, the permutations and combinations become extremely, I would say, exponential. So the bottom line is you cannot just rely on a single technology to automate end-to-end user journey. So traditionally, script-based testing like Selenium is one of the very well-known way of automating it. But again, it becomes it will become cost prohibitive because it is absolutely not scalable to an extent where so many people can script so many different permutation combinations, different systems. So in my opinion, there is a different approach we have to take, and that approach is hybrid workforce approach. So what is hybrid workforce in the context of hyperautomation? Hybrid workforce means that humans can work side by side with their digital assistants, like bots. Those digital assistants can be trained like human can be trained. So they know what to do. So for example, UXPLORE here, all the possible human gestures are already coded in the tool. So what happens is that these digital workers can actually act like human. They can recognize the interface and then do certain steps on those interface. So what it does, it is easier to maintain when your systems are becoming more complex, more control in the hands of businesses. One thing I want to highlight is because we are using the term RPA and robotic test automation, which is or hyper automation inspired by RPA. The difference between RPA and robotic test automation is that the environment. If you are doing the same process automation on a production environment for a user workflow, it is a process automation. But if you are using the same logic or using the same technology, but using on a test environment with test accounts, it's a test automation. So just to summarize everything, let's take an example. A system, very complex. It has many different interfaces, chatbots, voice, maybe touch. So different niche tools may be required to test different components of the system. So if we take a hybrid workforce approach, those bots can become an orchestrator. So not only those bots can test, let's say, for example, 60-70% of the system, but rest of the 30 and 40% of the system can, in my opinion, be easily automated by different niche tools. So those bots can go invoke those tools, run those test cases on those tools, grab the test results, consolidate the test results with their own results, and present a consolidated, I would say, report to all the stakeholders. So in summary, it was a maybe long answer, but in summary, I would say hyper automation is basically all focused at the end user, trying to trying to span the whole user journey by orchestrating different technologies in different manners. I hope I did not make it more complicated.
Thank you, Jahan. Actually, I think there are useful points of view, which I hope our audience will, I don't know, at least will receive some food for thought. Right. So how about you, Noel? What is your perspective on hyperautomation?
Thanks, Priya. So to build on what Jahan said and some of the examples that Raga articulated, it's important that we understand the evolving landscape around us. So if we look at it, all the enterprises, they become more and more complex over time. And consumer demand is driving the need for digitization all across the board. And that's adding to that complexity further. So what this means is, approaches that once worked, which were isolated or siloed in nature, are no longer going to be effective. So if you take an example of an e-commerce shopper, there may be a web interface, or there could be a mobile interface, or even sometimes a kiosk at the store. And all these different user touch points are likely working with multiple systems in the back end, including some legacy system. And at the end of the day, they are all serving the same purpose. But today, typically what would happen is each of these systems are looked up at in isolation, and whatever validation or even automation is done in silos. And people are acting as the glue that sort of stitch together what's happening across the system. And this used to be effective at some point, but now it's become essentially so complex, and we don't believe it's practical to carry on forward without the need for hyperautomation. So in my mind, with that context, hyperautomation to me is true end-to-end intersystem automation without any fine prints. Like, we are not talking about, okay, I'm going to stop it here, stop it there, because we have no way of automating that. That's what happens today, right? We're saying, if a human is able to do something, can we emulate that across these system boundaries and truly provide end-to-end automation, including decision-making and cognitive thinking, right? And this requires a holistic approach, and that is what hyperautomation, in my opinion.
Thank you. Great points. Now I'd like to go back to Jahan. Can you share some guidance on how organizations should implement hyperautomation, please?
Yeah, Prina, I think it is very simple. And I will go back to the fundamentals. Strategy first, tools second. Most of the organizations tend to go right into the tools implementation. And what happens? That at the end, you have many fragmented tools. So let's take a step back. We need to understand what we want to automate. We have to look at all the levels of the technology stack. For example, are we automating a UI, or we are automating the backend or APIs or database, or is network involved, or what kind of platforms involved? So we have to take a step back and strategize first. The second thing then we have to look at is that, are we going to rely on mainly proprietary tools or open source tools? And the most important thing is, what is the skill set of the team? How much they know, how good they are in the development skill set to script the automation. So if we want to assess the maturity of the organization in this strategy phase, I would maybe categorize those organizations in 3 different stages: beginner, scaling, or advanced. So beginners, I would say, are the organizations who are starting to I would say do experimentation in automation. But they do not know what to automate, where to automate. They have some level of component level automation already. They are maybe good at unit testing. They have some CI/CD in place. But what we have seen is that 40% of such organizations fail in achieving true return on investment if they do not take baby steps. And what baby steps mean, go back, understand what they want to achieve, which tech stack they want to automate, where to start, where to finish. The second type of organizations are the ones who already have some automation in place and they're scaling. So they are a bit more mature. They can automate, but I think the major difference between beginner and scaling is the automation is across components. So it is a wider range of automation. But their challenge is that they have unstable test environments. They have weak DevOps. Their tools are fragmented because in the beginning phase, or when they were beginners, they just jumped right into the tools. So 50% of those organizations fail to go to the next level if a holistic approach is not taken. And the last is the advanced ones. So they have very strong DevOps. Their QA, UAT are well integrated with CI/CD. But for them to be, I would say, have the true ROI, what they need to focus on is proper governance and then maintainability and looking into different niche areas so that hyper automation can be applied. If I want to summarize everything, there is only one message I want to give is please take a step back, plan, understand maturity of your organization, and then move forward.
Thank you, Jahan. So we talked about hyperautomation in a testing context, but Noel, do you want to touch on an example for process automation, please?
Sure, Karina. So hyperautomation, as I mentioned, is the closest thing to emulating true human behavior across system. What I mean by that is literally incorporating complicated decision making and other advances like artificial intelligence in natural language processing. So given this capability, it's a natural fit for complex transactional workflows that often requires layers of human decision making across different systems. So if you look at RPA, which we briefly touched on, currently it's limited to workflows that are simpler and often contain to one or two systems without need for too many decisions. And what this leads to is overall we are now putting a cap on potential ROI or payback in terms of what's possible. So in contrast, if you take a hyper-automation approach, you can really push the envelope and unlock significant value. So for example, we work with the leading telco in Canada to automate order processing operations for a communication product. So we literally automated a function within the organization, not a task. And it was extremely complex. There were 7 different systems involved. Some of them were very legacy type in nature with a lot of issues in surplus stability. And then on top of it, it's a highly complicated function in terms of how the orders were processed. There were something around 50,000 nested permutations of decisions that had to be made. So it was a very human manual operation, and we were able to transform that and automate it end to end. And we, as a result, capacity with 80% cost savings. And something like this, wouldn't be possible if. And often, what happens is if you take a siloed approach, you are investing in technology and solutions, but you're not necessarily saving cost. So now you cost. So, it is an example of process automation where without hyper-automation approaches, it wouldn't be feasible.
Great, very insightful, I have to say. And I'd like to go back to Jahan. We didn't finish with you yet. One more question. So you mentioned about DevOps in your answer earlier. What role hyperautomation implementation?
Yeah, if I go back to, again, fundamentals, people, process, technology. So I touched upon tools, which is technology part. I touched upon process, human working side by side with digital workers. Now the process. So without process, you cannot implement hyper automation in a seamless manner. So what we need to have a framework? It's called dev test ops. So next question would be maybe what is dev test ops? So it is, in my view, marriage between DevOps and continuous testing. So DevOps basically help reliable, frequent releases, while continuous testing means that you test early, often, and throughout the life cycle. So by doing continuous testing, what basically you achieve? You achieve shift left. What does shift left mean? Is that if we can find as many defects as possible earlier in the cycle, you will save significant amount of money. Industry data shows that if you find defects in the functional testing, your cost of fixing them is about 10x. And if you find them during system test, the cost of fixing them is 40x, 40x. And if you find them actual production release, sometimes the cost is as high as 640 times. So going back to dev test ops, it will enable us to shift early, test early, and then when we test early, the goal is that if we can find those defects between 10x window, and minimum defects are escaped beyond that window. So I would say that we cannot talk about hyper automation if your basic infrastructure and process framework is not in place. And then for that, every organization have to have a very strong, mature dev test ops framework in place.
Perfect, thank you. And now actually I'd like to focus on taking some questions from our audience. So everyone attending, please start putting your questions in the chat window. I saw we have already some people doing that, but please, I encourage you to do so. Okay, so I'll take the first question here. So we have someone working for a law firm and would like to know more about the tool UXPLORE and also how this tool can be used in their firm. I think. Noel?
Sure. Yeah, I could take that. So I think it's important to kind of understand the challenges in automation, and then I think it would make sense as to what UXPLORE does. So automation is nothing new. It's been around. However, effective automation that actually produces results, I think the challenge always lies. So when we looked at the landscape of what's possible with automation, often you have tools that do a good job in a siloed specific platform or area, and as we discussed, the need for scale across platforms is something that's becoming mandatory given the user experience is demanded, right? Second challenge with automation is, traditional highly skilled workforce, because it's all program driven. Almost you needed a developer like skill set to do any automation. So now the challenge is, like, we are trying to save cost, but it requires heavy upfront investment before you could even get started. So with these two sort of complementary or like almost unavoidable issues at hand is where we set off to build UXPLORE. And the fundamental focus is, let's forget about the differences in systems and let's challenge ourselves so that we could enable users who shouldn't be overwhelmed with spending time and effort with actual automation itself, rather focus on the outcome of automation. So UXPLORE is a cross-platform, no-code automation solution that allows automation across a variety of systems, web or mobile or desktop or even legacy systems for that matter, and do so without the need for writing any code. So within the platform, all the user actions that are commonly used are already abstracted and given as steps. So, and a user who's a expert in the domain could simply stitch together the flow without worrying about the actual code behind it. So this is what the platform does. Now, specifically talking about the law firm use case, would be is when there is repetition and a lot of time-consuming tasks that are done. And in the legal field, there is significant amount of what we would call swivel chair processes, where you have the data already in some digital form, but often you got to go into multiple other systems to input the same data, variant or transform format. And often this is done as a human. Good starting point for legal firms, where we could handle any data processing from one source to multiple source, as an example. Another opportunity could be leveraging natural language processing. There are a lot of documents that get dealt with and a lot of emails that come through. So NLP technology could be used from that perspective to understand unstructured data that's coming in, that again is typically people go through them to make sense of it and fill some forms or submit it to a system. So these would be a couple of use cases that I could think of.
And I would want to just add one more thing, that so you focused on the vertical, I would say, use of UXPLORE is because you have accounts payable, you have accounts receivable, where all the invoices are being processed. You have to see how many hours have been used by different lawyers. So all that is done by currently human. But all these are very specific task-based, wheelchair, rule-based tasks. So why not digital workers? Digital workers can grab all the timesheets, can grab all the hours used, consolidate them, create the reports, and then send out invoices to your clients. So this is, I would say, another like on the shared services side and horizontal use case of automation.
Yeah, great example.
Thank you to both of you for taking this one. Okay, I'll pick up another question from our group chat. So this is for Jahan. Difficult challenge you have had to overcome in one of your test automation deployments, and how did you do it?
I think I can give many examples, but I think one of the example I can give is for one of the telcos, where basically it was a live system, and then we wanted to basically test or automate the testing of 1,200 user flows, and actually more than 1,200 user flows in English and French. And the idea was that on all the platforms, whether they are web, tablet, or mobile, we go, we test, we automate through digital workforce. And we find issues on a production system before actual consumers can find those issues. And for example, if credit card transaction is not working, so customer service and say the e-commerce or the bill payment is not working, we were supposed to find it beforehand and send it to the right people. So how did we achieve it? Before, they were thinking of maybe they would need about 40 people to do this. We were able to do with 4 or 5 people, with the rest are all digital workforce. And what we did is that we understood what are those end-to-end user journeys. What is the browse flow? What is the self-serve flow? what is the payment flow, and then those flows were emulated by bots, and then we would go on the production system, we will make a transaction, even we will go to the billing and reverse that transaction so that we can test it again. So that was a very, very complex scenario that we did for a telco. And then it saved significant amount of money. Not only that, the customer satisfaction, which is right now, I believe, is the single most KPI of success.
Yeah, that's a valid point. And Noel, what about you? Would you like to join Jahan?
Yeah, actually, I think, like there, no, I mean, that's a great example. What I want to say is often QA or testing focus is pre-launch. And unfortunately, a lot of the costly issues are found post-launch due to changes that are not in the control of the actual team that deployed the solution. So what I mean by that is let's say we come up with this great self-serve application on mobile, thoroughly tested, everything is perfect, and we go live. All it takes sometimes is either an OEM or actual, Apple or Google to push out an update to break that. So this is, I think, something that's often overlooked. So the example that Jahan brought up is something I hope more organizations could consider in terms of proactive testing. Because what that use case did was all these digital assets, let's see what the user experience is in production, and let's make sure that whatever the intended features are working. And the moment something is not working, because these were like a massive regression almost in production, and you are catching issues, daily before it becomes an outage for a broader user base. So I think, that was a very good example, and I think a lot more organizations should consider that.
Thank you. Yeah, great stuff. One more question that came into my chat. To adopt hyperautomation, is there a maturity model organizations should consider? So Jahan or Noel, could you continue, and then Jahan will pick up?
Yeah, sure. I think Jahan touched on this a bit earlier. I think to simply put this, we have to be honest with ourselves as to where we are, right? So if we are just crawling, no point thinking about running a marathon, right? So we got to build toward that. So hyperautomation, for example, would be the end goal, and it's going to bring tons of benefit. But it's important that, as Jahan said, like taking a realistic assessment of where we are today, and based on that, come up with appropriate steps to bridge the gap. So starting off, if an organization is, not doing any automation and purely a manual testing organization, first step is making sure that the processes are in place, appropriate, scenarios are even documented, so that any automation initiative could be successful. Then you take sort of a low-hanging fruit approach and go after simple in-app automation. Then, as a next phase, you build on it to incorporate interapp or cross-system journey. So it's not something where, without the thought up front and strategy, we should jump into. So the important thing is understand where we want to get to, but more importantly, understand where we are today, so that eventually all the investment will pay off, right? Otherwise, prematurely just piecemeal doing things will not give us the results.
And I can just build upon what Noel is saying, because you mentioned low-hanging fruit. So basically, if I look at any problem statement, when we look at the strategy, we have to see that what are the areas that we have to focus first. Hyperautomation is an ambition, yes, but it is not the solution of everything. Maybe 20-30% of the, I would say, of efficiency can be achieved only by streamlining their processes first. There is no point of even going into automation if you are not streamlining their processes first. And then the next step would be maybe next 30-40% of efficiency can be achieved by just RPA, because you may find that there are whole, like literally hundreds of processes which are just rule-based tasks and repetitive processes. So automate them first. Maybe you can achieve 60-70% of your efficiency only by RPA and by streamlining your processes. Then the last 10-20% mile, you can go and then add hyper automation and all those different scenarios that were not automated before. You automate. So as Noel said, I think it varies from client to client, their maturity level, and the end goal. Going back to my strategy point, that first understand what is the goal, what is the revenue, increase in revenue you are aiming for, what is the productivity gain you are aiming for, how much ROI you need, how much investment you want to make. Based on that, properly bucketize your phased approach. Okay, phase one, we are going to do this. Phase two, we are going to do this. And at the end of each phase, please calculate ROI. That did we achieve what we said? If that is a successful, move to the next phase. So that will be my approach.
Thank you. And in the last few minutes, actually, both of you mentioned about digital workforce, digital bots, all these things. And maybe some people will actually see this as a danger threatening their jobs. Could you please try to elaborate a little bit on actually the enabler and the benefits of using the digital workforce without jeopardizing the people's jobs and all the fears that are on the market?
I think it's a very good question. A lot of people think about it that way, but in my view, it does not eliminate jobs. It just redirect people from mundane, daily, repetitive tasks to more value-added tasks. And actually, it increase and boost morale of people big time, because now they are spending their time on things that can generate a revenue or really bring productivity to the organization. I can give you an example. We did this process automation for a company where there were a bunch of people who were only sitting, and what they were doing is that they are gathering all the orders, and they were taking those orders and putting those orders into their manufacturing plant, like what fields of like what different fields parameters have to go day in and day out. What we did is that we deployed digital workers. They will read the process the orders from emails. They will open, they will store them, they will decipher them, they will put all the data into their manufacturing plant, and all those people by that organization were redirected to focus on sales, and their sales increased because those people who actually knew the process in and out, who knew the domain in and out, were actually like they proved to be the best salespeople ever. And what those salespeople got are actually personal assistants who do not ask for sick leaves, who do not ask for raises. All they do is go do the job, and we focus on the more interesting stuff. So, Noel, you want to add anything?
No, I think that's again, as you said, is a very common field, but it's a misconception, because often what we find is people have more work than they could do, and in fact, they cannot do their job because they are being slowed down by all these time-wasting things. So if you look, there's tons of data out there. Look across industries, and the data that shows about 50% of our time, we end up doing things to get to a point so that we could do our job. So when we're talking about automation, it's about streamlining and making sure that we could go do our job properly, right? Second aspect is on the process automation front. Any automation that we touch, these are traditionally activities that were offshore, for example, right? And which causes its own set of problems. So when we go and do process level automation, often we are onshoring those tasks. And in fact, companies are growing and scaling by hiring even more people here within Canada. So I think, there was a time where automation was viewed as, okay, it's going to reduce jobs. But reality is, in today's environment, no one is sitting around without things to do. Rather, the time is being wasted, and there's always more things they could do. So it's finding that capacity, free them up to go focus on the value add.
Thank you. Yeah, so I like the idea of digital assistant. So maybe I can take one. I'll have one, and can I go on vacation after that? Okay, so I'm checking the time, and we are almost at the end of our session. I'd like to thank to everyone who participated, to our audience, also to my colleague Raga that presented at the beginning, and of course to Jahan and Noel. Sorry, guys. We'll make sure we'll follow up after this. We'll send you a recording of today's session and also a copy of the presentation given by Raga. And of course, if you have, in the meantime, questions or thoughts, feel free to email us back, because we'll get back to you for sure to cover those. I wish you all to have a great rest of your day, and to finish or to start your lunch.
Thank you, Priya. Thank you all.
Thank you, Priya. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.